Hello. So for the last 9 months, I've been doing online tours of different museums, art galleries, places, cities, historic places, bios of famous people's lives and stuff online as kind of tours, if you like, or experiences where I just share my screen with you on a computer and then take you through this little 1 hour of some kind of cultural experience. I'll leave links in the beneath the video for the different places where you can find out about upcoming tours. I do these live, but I make these YouTube videos. I upload them afterwards so you can watch them here. But if you do join live, then you can chat to me before with the group. We're about 15, 20 people at the moment who join every week on a Wednesday and Saturday, but you can see that more in the links. And then at the end, we all have like a chat and people ask questions, and it's generally kind of like nice. So yeah, hope you enjoy this tour of the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. So yes, the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. So it was built at the very end of the 1800s as a train station, a very gorgeous kind of sort of neoclassical train station. But actually, within a few decades, the trains were too big to fit in there. And by World War II, it was I think it was a mailing kind of center to centralize mail and send it out. And then in the next few decades, it was debated what to do with it. It was set to be destroyed, actually. But the Minister of Culture at the time, I think this is in the 60s or early 70s, fought for it. And it then was decided to become a modern art place for the art in the Louvre. So it became then a sort of transitional point from older art to something more modern. And in that vein of modernism is roughly sort of 1850s onwards. So we'll be looking at a lot of the arising of the modern art and the modern mind, especially in French art, like the Realists, the Impressionists, and the post-Impressionists. So this is inside the museum, and I'm going to try and give you, a look into the rooms and then the paintings in each of them, so that you get a mix of both things. So this is the central hall when you come in, and many rooms kind of lead out from that. And up on one of the higher floors is the Impressionist section, which we'll spend quite a bit of time in. It's one of their kind of finest areas, if you like. They have a gorgeous cafe as well. So I wanted to start with something before the modern, if you like, which is Romantic art. So they have this amazingly dramatic painting by William Bouguereau, who is this guy here. So this is the Romantic period. The Romantic period was they hated the period of the Enlightenment, this rationale, this kind of cool rationalism. Man is the measure of all things. Everything can be worked out. There's no more mystery anymore. And also the increasing of technology and industry and stuff like this. And so the Romantics were all about the mysteries of life and these deep, powerful emotions that you can't control, and they're overwhelming. And so this is just an amazingly dynamic example of the Romantic period, showing Dante Alighieri and Virgil in Hell, in the famous book by the poem by Dante, Inferno. And these two figures, these two criminals from the seventh layer of hell, who are battling each other very sort of emotively and intensely. So this is a great example of the romantic period. This is the artist again. So I wish I could spend more time on all of these things, but I wanted to focus on the arising of the modern, which is very debatable. What is modern art? But a very early example of something of quite a big change are the French Realists. So after the Romantic period, but instead of the Enlightenment, people became more realistic. They wanted to show the real world. They wanted to show the lower classes and the middle classes. They wanted to challenge what art was. Should art be the subject matter? And at the time, the subject matter was always biblical or classical. So it was Christ ascending, or some image from Ovid, or some kind of classical scene. And it had to be very realistic. So you shouldn't be able to tell that it's been painted. The new system of thought was that art doesn't necessarily have to be that. It can be about creating a social message of the time, of being a mirror to society, which was very new. Also later on, it just becomes about the paint itself on the surface. The subject is not important. It's just the paint itself. And this is something that seems to arise in Northern Europe, but especially in France, in Paris, in the 1850s and 60s. So it's a pretty amazing moment, if you like. So there are these two massive paintings in one of the halls in the museum by Gustave Courbet. And Courbet was one of the earliest French realists. He was middle upper class, so he had the time, he didn't have to work. And he was interested in basically destroying the status quo, or the way things were in the French art world. If you wanted to have a painting exhibited, to be seen by people, and to get work as a painter, you had to go through the salon in Paris. And this was very high-minded. It was all about making painting smooth. You can't see that it's really painting, and it depicts classical scenes and biblical scenes. And then Courbet comes along, and he paints these enormous canvases, which are meters wide, which is a style, a scale reserved for the epic scenes from classical mythology or the Bible. But he doesn't depict those kinds of scenes. He depicts something much more everyday. This is Courbet here. So this one, the funeral at Ornans, which is a little town in the south of France, is, again, it's got this epic scene, but it doesn't have stylized figures. It has everyday people. These were actual people who were at an actual funeral, which Courbet went to. And it's not dramatizing them. It's not giving this sort of high-flown message behind it. It's not associating it with classical mythology or the Bible directly. It's something very everyday. And it was very controversial at the time. We look at it now and think this belongs in sort of classical painting, but it was very controversial. The critics from the salon, they didn't understand why you would want to see these ugly figures, these dark, kind of, skinny, depressed looking people in a painting that was reserved for something else. The expectations were something much higher. So this is a really amazing moment in art, because it did away with the old. It stuck its thumb in the eyes of the salon. This word avant-garde becomes more known for people like Manet and the Impressionists, who we'll talk about a bit later. But this word avant-garde is really interesting. This was a part of the army that would go in front of the other soldiers and smash the enemy lines. It would break up the enemy lines so that something new could come in. And this was really what this was doing. This is from 1850 or thereabouts, and it actually got into the salon, but it was very, very controversial. Oh, one other detail that I really like is this dog, because this is as if it were a photo. Photos did exist at this time, ever since the 1830s. And if you're going to a funeral, you expect potentially, not expect, but a dog can just kind of wander in and you get the picture. It's like, oh, damn it, there's a dog in the picture. Take it again. I really like this. It doesn't have this kind of moralizing tone. Dogs are an image of chastity, something like this. It just comes in the image. So it's this painting life in art. On the other side of the wall is this one, the artist in his atelier. It's a real allegory. And this is Courbet here in the middle. He's painting a landscape painting, and he's got this very classical figure who's looking over him. painting a landscape. Landscape was the lowest genre in the kind of hierarchy of art. And so the fact that he's focusing on this landscape is already, it's a thumb in the eye of the salon. It's thought that this figure in the background, this kind of classical posing figure who looks like an ancient Greek or Roman statue, is in the shadows of this new style of realism. And this represents the salon being, you know, pushed away or overshadowed by the avant-garde. And on the right are figures from the French society at the time in Paris, people like Baudelaire and Charfleur, who were art critics and poets, and who were pioneers of realism, of breaking away from the old. And again, this painting was controversial because it challenged the high ideals of the art world at the time. This is just to give you a sense of what it was coming up against. This is a Romantic era painting. I think it's also from the 1850s, showing the kind of things that people had a preference for. So very stylized, very much kind of Michelangelo kind of figures. So very traditional. So then we come to the room with Manet paintings. And this painting had actually been in Paris its whole life, ever since, I think it was 1865. Sorry, I'm not sure of the exact date. I think it may have been in the 50s. Sorry, I can't remember the date. But this painting, the Déjeuner sur herbe, or Luncheon on the Grass, was really, really, really controversial. So it's by this man, Manet, Edouard Manet, who actually became a lot more famous in a way for the people that he brought around him, because he gathered people like Renoir and Monet and Alfred Sisley, these people who then became the Impressionists. And but Manet was an early Impressionist, if you like, but he was also a realist. And this painting was really controversial. One sense is the perspective is all wrong. So there was this idea that the perspective should be perfect. When you're looking at a painting, it should be like a direct, clear glimpse into a place. You shouldn't be able to see that it's a painting. But this is showing that it's a painting. The grass is just completely flat. There's no detail in the background. And this figure, you know, if she was actually in real perspective, she would be about 9 feet tall. So it's a complete, it's modern art. It's modern art for the time. This is breaking people's expectations about what art should be. He said about his, you know, he was a very skilled painter. He could have painted grass, but he said, you know, I'm not a botanist. I'm not a gardener. I'm not going to paint the grass like this. They said, well, why did you paint this modern woman instead of painting an angel? And he said, well, show me an angel and I'll paint an angel. So he's painting from the real life of the time. This is actually a real woman who we'll see in another painting. And she's not being, you know, coy and gently flirtatious, but humble and meek, as these images of women used to be. She's staring directly out at the viewer. And she's sitting there naked, her clothes just taken off, amidst young men. It's not a kind of innocent, nice little scene. There's something very challenging. It's challenging the own viewer's morals, if you like. You know, this is the thing that you like to do. You like to hang around with women. You maybe even like to hang around with prostitutes. And that was a big part of the society at the time. So it's really challenging on that level. But also it challenges the ideals of art at the time. If you look at some of the influences from this painting, you can see these old images from classical mythology of this group sitting, flirting with each other with these sort of nymphs or classical goddesses. No one's looking out at the screen from the canvas. So Manet's painting really was a real provocative piece. You can see the influence with later artists like Gauguin and also Monet, who we'll get to soon. So another very provocative painting, even more provocative than that one by Manet, is this one called Olympia by Manet. And this woman in this one is even more provocative because she's clearly a prostitute and she is looking out directly again at the viewer. And she's not looking at this, again, this coy way. So if you look at the inspiration for this painting by Titian a few hundred years before, this is a very classical scene. This is Venus, the goddess of love. And she's not, really challenging. She's kind of titillating. But Manet's Venus, if you like, is an everyday, real life person. And she's staring out at the viewer. She's not staring with passion really either. It's like you're the person who's coming in to the salon to have this interaction. It's like a business transaction, this kind of objectifying of people. They become objects that you can purchase. This was one of the concerns in the world in the 1800s, that things were becoming so materialistic. And it's just very, very challenging. This stare is so kind of salty and like also calm and challenging, something completely unseen in female faces at the time in art. It's also painted in the 1860s at the time of the American Civil War. And so this African-American or African-European, African-French woman here, this is a very topical piece again about slavery and perhaps this message of this comparison of slavery and of people being objects that you can buy for their services with this, this lady of the night here, this Olympia. Also, if you look at the, if you look at the old one by Titian, there's this little sleeping dog, which is this symbol of chastity. But in Manet's version, in Manet's version, it's a cat, or the other name that cats are called by, which is a very old term for, sex and sexiness. So it was enormously challenging, that painting. Yeah. So this is Manet here at work with the some of the future Impressionists around him. So he was really instrumental in bringing in this new era of art. So we move on to Monet. This is him in his later years with his famous beard, Claude Monet, and a room where many of his paintings are. So the difference between the Impressionists, people like Monet and Renoir, is that they were much more interested in the light and the colors, the getting an impression through the artist of the real world. They weren't that interested in this realism of portraying society and kind of commentating on society. So this is in the same vein as Manet's Déjeuner sur l'herbe, but it's a play with light. The light on his shoulders and on her dress and cascading over the picnic rug is really, really beautiful, and a very early example of this fascination with just the pure color and the pure fascination with light. Monet was one of the earliest plein air painters, people going out into the open air and actually painting from what they see. This was not taboo, but it was people thinking, what the hell are they doing? That's so pointless. Like, what are you going to get from that? Painting a tree, anyone can do that. So it also coincided with tube paint. There was a new innovation in paint that you could have it in metal tubes and squeeze it out like toothpaste. And this was hugely, a huge change in the ease with which one could paint. Before that, you had to carry paint round in a pig's bladder and mix it, and then you couldn't really use it again, and you didn't have the same kind of range of colors available. So this tube painting was also really, really important. And part of the benefit of plein air painting is that you can paint one painting at midday and you see a different kind of light completely, and then you can paint another painting of the same object a few hours later or earlier and see the complete difference in light. So Monet was famous for painting these images like the cathedral here, or his famous haystacks, when he would go out in the morning, set up a canvas and start painting. But within 20 minutes, the light had changed. So he went onto another canvas that was set up and then started painting the next half an hour of light, etc. And was very famous for doing this, so that you are creating an impression. It's beyond photography. I mean, photography was black and white at this time, but the Impressionists were giving something much more integrative, something much more subjective, as if you're really looking through the eyes, you know, sometimes fuzzy, sometimes blurred with different kinds of light of the viewer. So again, it's in a way much more, if you consider the differences in today's art world, something like Tracy Emin's bed, you know, which is just this bed with condoms and coffee cups and stuff around it. At the time, a lot of people were like, what? This is so ridiculous. I don't get it. But it has its value, you know, and a lot of this art at the time in France was seen in this way. It was kind of trash. Like, what's the point? He's painting like a child, you know, like anyone could do this. But it was the desire to create something new. And the story I love about this painting, again by Monet, from the 70s, the 1870s, of the Gare Saint-Lazare in Paris. You can see these new Parisian buildings in the background by Haussmann, a guy who redeveloped Paris in the mid-1800s. Monet approached the manager of the station master of the station and said, "Can I paint your grand, impressive station?" And the guy was like, "Yes, of course," and was kind of proudly showing him around and stuff. And then, you know, imagine seeing this finished painting. This isn't about, you know, the grandeur of the station and the details and all of the kind of beautiful artwork. It's about steam. It's just about how the light is playing in different ways, both in the background buildings compared to the shadows inside. With the smoke, sometimes it's blue, sometimes it's white, sometimes it's gray or black. It's just an exploration of light, which is really amazing. Probably a complete disappointment for the station master, but a really great, really beautiful painting, I think. This is one of my favorite Impressionist paintings. It's so airy and light. You can almost smell the summer grasses and see the poppies waving in a kind of blurred way in your eyes in a kind of gentle summer breeze. This is by Monet again. I think it's his wife and child. So again, it's not some kind of, you know, highly moralizing classical scene. It's something very, very everyday. I just love it. You know, you can't even see their faces. The boy's face and his wife's face, it's just a single smudge of paint. But that's in a way much more realistic to what you see through the eye than, you know, the exact details of someone from this far away. Here it is in more detail here. Again, one of the complaints from the art critics was, I mean, why would you want to have this? It's not finished, you know, it's like it's half done. There's just this wash of gray sometimes when you should be seeing a green field full of vibrant grass. There's also something to say about the size of these paintings. If you remember the two big paintings at the beginning, this was often the size of paintings, which could be reserved for people's manor houses or their castles. But there was a growing middle class in the late 1800s who wanted these paintings. These paintings were much lower priced than these big, grand classical paintings that you could actually hang on your wall, and it would show things from your daily life, things that you could actually relate to. Yeah, so a different, completely different change in the art world. And one of his most famous stages is his gardens at Juvenile in northern France, where he lived for his later life. These are I think there were 250 paintings done of lilies. And a lovely quote from him is that, "I will never get this. You know, however many paintings of lilies I do, I will never approach the reality of them." So I really like that quote, this kind of endless chipping away to try and create these scenes. But you're also constantly changing. So they're impressions. You're never going to get to the heart of something because half an hour later it's changed. I really love this in art, you know, trying to show the intangible, the ephemeral with these beautiful, you know, involving colors. Yeah, amazing. And his famous Japanese bridge over his gardens, really just gorgeous, and made more gorgeous, I find, by the fact that you can actually go there and see it. Really, really amazing. So someone who's in a way more impressionistic, well, not more, but he's more wispier in his brushstrokes is Renoir. This is a self-portrait when he was young. So one of the best examples of Renoir is I forget what it's called, the dance at the Moulin. Sorry, I forgot the name exactly. It's really bad, but it's a very famous one from him, and shows this again, this impressionist's fascination with light, with color, with movement, with a single moment, you know, portraying a single moment painted when you're actually there, instead of in a studio. And it's really gorgeous, you know, seeing the way that the light is playing like off this guy's, the back of his jacket, these, you know, dappled sunlight spots, and all over the ground. These moments in people's lives, this sense of joy, you know, going out to bars like this was quite a new thing from the 1850s and 60s onwards. And as you can imagine, it was just very fun, you know, to go out and be with friends and meet new people and go and flirt and, you know, get a bit drunk. It's incredibly exciting and fun. And you kind of get a sense of that in these paintings. Again, many of them are real people. Most of the details that are brought out in people, the people who are actually focused on, are actually real people that Renoir knew. Yeah. One critic said, I feel so sorry for these women, these corpses, they have green faces. But they would have green, you know, foreheads or green splashes of color if they were standing under trees in full bloom in the summer. That's what you see. It's the impression of the scene. So actually, again, there is this sense of realism. But this is much closer to this aesthetic movement of painting for art's sake. You know, it's about the colors being on the canvas, about showing the impression of the scene through the colors and the movement of, you know, how the light can be picked up. There's often also not a single focus. There's a kind of, everything gets the same attention to its impressionism. So it's this sort of much more holistic approach in a way to painting than just having one focus in the middle of Ariadne or Christ or something like this. So what I meant earlier by this wispiness, I'm going to try and, sorry, get rid of this thing at the top. Sorry. This wispiness, this is by Renoir, the path through the tall grasses, which I find really mesmerizing. It's almost like, you know, half a dream, like this bright kind of vision or a memory. It's like having a memory of a scene with this really hazy summer's day and these figures walking through the grass. And again, the details really aren't there. You know, her face here is like a splodge of pink paint with 3 dots and a little kind of smiley face. It must have seemed very absurd at the time to these more traditional art critics to see images like this. But for us, I think one of the, you know, Impressionists are one of the most popular art groups. People love, you know, having little postcards of Renoirs or Monets on their walls because it's just so full of light. It's so refreshing. And one thing that Renoir said, someone said, all your paintings are so pretty. And he was like, well, there's enough ugliness out there. There are enough ugly paintings. You know, essentially, you know, life is dull enough, or can be. So why not paint pretty paintings? Fill the world with some kind of joy. So from Renoir, we move on to Degas. So a little bit of a different attitude again towards this new avant-garde art form. He was more interested in the social darkness of society, or the realism again of society. But he does use Impressionism as well, you know, these kind of like blotches of color to create these impression. But one of the centerpieces of the Impressionist area is this, the little ballet dancer. This is when she was, I think, 14 years old, 13 or 14. On the surface, it looks like a very elegant study of a young woman. But the position it's given by Degas as a kind of classical figure that deserves its own statue was again something quite controversial, because ballet dancers, most ballet dancers were actually a kind of entertainment, a bit of a sordid entertainment at the time of Degas in the 1870s and 1880s. So he would go along, he wasn't interested so much in the performance, he was interested in this underside of society, these established norms, where these very young women who were being forced into this world of the ballet to become dancers, and were very often encouraged by their parents to you know, come on to the men and to engage in relationships with much older men in order to fund themselves and to fund their family. Many of the ballet dancers were thrown out for being accused of prostitution, but they had to. There was this very, you know, nasty undercurrent in the society. And Degas was really interested in bringing that out and showing people this. This is a copy of a wax model, but she had a real tutu, real clothing. She had real hair originally. And it's a sad story, because this is a real girl who disappears from the records at age 15. But she, again, she was part of this semi-prostitution ring with the ballet world. And she was thrown out of the ballet school in Paris for being accused of liaising with older men. So it's a kind of monument to this darker underbelly of society, the plight of these younger people. So it's quite dark in a way, and it's again, you know, art as a mirror to society. This is a younger Degas here, and a side-on of the ballerina. To bring out this point about this undercurrent, next time you look at one of Degas' ballet paintings, of which there are hundreds, try and look for some of these undercurrents. In this one here, you can see this shady man in a top hat who's looking in on these sort of, you know, 12, 13, 14-year-old girls, and is presumably being a bit kind of trying to get his foot in the door and have a relationship, or, you know, have sex with one of these young women. So it's potentially something a bit more like strippers in today's society, which is quite interesting. Yeah, Olga said, I used to love Little Ballet Dancer until I read The Painted Girls by Kathy Mary Buchanan. Right, yeah, the undercurrents of these works is very fascinating. Another one by Degas, I really like this one. It's so modern in a way. It's because it's not showing some stylized scene or something set up. It's showing like this image of someone who's just alone in a city, presumably in some kind of daydream, not necessarily alone, but you certainly get the sense of someone who's not really happy. They're not really there. It's this commentary on loneliness. Perhaps she is in a bar, perhaps she's also a prostitute. This seems to be a very common theme, but she may also just be the partner of this guy, and she's just bored and alienated. You get this with Edward Hopper, you know, with the scenes in this famous scene in the bar a few decades later. So this is this really early moment of this brilliant kind of art as a mirror to society. But Degas includes this impressionism, these undetailed, like the dress is just sort of these swathes of brown, and yeah, it's really quite provocative, and yeah, would have touched people and challenged people, I can imagine. So there's also a work by, I forget his first name, I think it's Gustave Caillebotte, or Caillebotte, if you don't want to pronounce it properly. These workers, the woodworkers, God, I keep forgetting the names of the paintings, sorry, but they're workers in a room. Let's talk about it in more detail. This is Caillebotte here. So it's from the 1870s, and it again combines this new sense of impressionism, this new feeling of light, this exploration of light, and the playing of different colors together, but also with the everyday, elevating the everyday and portraying it in its essence. These are two guys in conversation, and they're lower class, presumably they're day laborers. They, you got his skinny back here, very skinny bodies. The male nude was a very popular subject ever since the ancient Greeks, of this sort of the perfect form and the way that you could bring out muscles and all this stuff. Think of, Michelangelo's David and all this kind of thing. And these figures, they don't have that. They've got these bent backs. They're day laborers. It's focusing on this scene, a very trivial everyday scene, which is really, again, it was very new and a brilliant moment in the arising of the modern, if you like. There's also some, you can read about this link between the curls of the banisters over here and the curls of these wood chippings contrasted with the otherwise quite straight lines of the room. So the whole thing is a kind of a creation, a visual, emotive, social creation. Yeah, quite beautiful. And talking of visual emotive creations, we get James Mcneil Whistler, who painted the famous picture here, Arrangement in Grey and Black, which is also known as Whistler's mother. But this word arrangement is very important because Whistler was a real character, and he was American, but he styled himself as a Southerner from the States, and had this deep Southern drawl, this sort of cultured gentleman with land. But actually he wasn't really that kind of person, but styled himself so, and was very interested in music and how music and art can be much more involved. Art had this limiting label still at this time, that it had to be about the subject. But music didn't have that. Music is just a beautiful sensory experience. It can have a message, but it's about being touched, about being emotionally touched, just because there's this beautiful music. And he was interested in trying to do that with painting. So this is an arrangement, like a musical term, an arrangement in grey and black. Something else on the chat here. Oh, perhaps men who had moved to the city from countryside where they may have been ploughing fields. The floor looks like a ploughed field. Oh, about the last painting. Yeah, thanks, Sylvia. That's a really interesting point. So again, there's a new step in art of really abstracting art from what it used to be to something much more conceptual, if you like, which was trying to create this sense of the different colors playing together for the sake of the art. So Whistler was not friends with Oscar Wilde, but they had this great kind of clash of wits. This famous thing of Oscar Wilde saying, "I wish I had said that," and Whistler saying, "You will, Oscar, you will," to something that Whistler had said very wittily. And Oscar Wilde was all about this aesthetic movement of, art for art's sake. Beauty doesn't need to have a reason or some subject. And so this is actually an exploration of color. But it got really taken out of hand and became this symbol in a more modern culture. This is Whistler, by the way. This painting of his mother became this symbol of kind of stoic mothers, especially in America. So you get these images coming all over the place about, the beautiful image of this solid, stable mother, kind of quite pinched, but calm and collected. And it's kind of everywhere, but this wasn't the intention. The original intention of the art piece was an exploration of grays and blacks. So it's quite interesting. This is from Mr. Bean movie, which I just thought I would add it in there. This is another one in the same room of a river view, but I think this is also called Arrangement. Sorry, I've forgotten the name again, but again, it's a musical term. So this is an exploration of color. I think it's Arrangement in Green and Violet. So it's again, this musical sense of creating art that speaks to you. It speaks to you emotively without this story. It's a play for the eyes and whatever connection there is between the eyes and the brain and the soul and the heart. something that's trying to create something different out of art. This is one of his most extreme examples of that, is a painting of Chelsea in London. This painting, I don't think this is in the Musée d'Orsay. I think it's actually in London, but it's a great example of how far he took things in a direction of what we can call kind of modern or abstract. It's just a series of smudging colors onto this canvas. But you know it's a river scene. And there was this famous trial between Whistler and John Ruskin, an art critic. And in this trial, the guy said, look, how long does it take you to paint some of these paintings that you're selling for this huge amount of money? And he said, well, maybe 2 or 3 days. And the guy said, so you're charging all this money just to paint for 2 or 3 days? And he said, yes, I paint for 2 or 3 days, but it's a lifetime of experience that goes onto the canvas. And that's something also very changing in how the artist is being seen. And this is still, late 1800s. In another little room are some lovely paintings by Alfred Sisley, who was an English man, but spent most of his life in France and was a kind of core member of the Impressionist movement. Oh, so this is a scene in the fog. It's this amazing portrayal of mist. So again, prior to the Impressionists, landscape painting was hardly ever focused on as a pure art form. And suddenly now you get these paintings of just the mist. Not only can you not make out the backgrounds, as in some other Impressionist paintings, you can hardly make out anything. There's a series of kind of brushy strokes for these silhouettes of the trees. This old lady, you see her dress, it's just this line of, you can obviously see it's a painting. There's no attempt to hide this. It's just something so new. I mean, it's really amazing to think about it, to see what came before, only 20 or 30 years before. And just to imagine this change in society, this huge change, to have these kind of paintings being appreciated and bought and people going out and painting them. They're also just beautiful. I mean, it's a lovely portrayal of the mist. So a bit on the post-Impressionists, because this is where most critics agree and art historians agree that this is the earliest modern art for sure. People like Manet, the Impressionists, and Courbet and the Realists is debatable, but the post-Impressionists are something very modern indeed. One thing about that is that people like Van Gogh, they go beyond depicting a scene in an impressionistic way where it's roughly accurate, but it's a fascination with the color and the light. For Van Gogh, there was something more about putting himself into the paintings. He once said in one of his letters to his brother Theo, I hope that people through my paintings can see that I was a great feeling soul. So there's this merging of the canvas and the painter into something much more almost surreal, because it starts to take on the psychoses and the mental patterns and the inner feelings of the artist. So this is a portrait from the last year of his life, actually, where he says again to his brother, you can see in my eyes my insecurities, but my face is much calmer than before. And a sense of that calmness is the fact that everything is wavy apart from his eyes. It's this amazing sense of kind of intense self-questioning or a kind of intense self-focus, which is something very modern, the arising of the individual and about, wanting to do psychotherapy or to look at yourself, to be aware of yourself, to be aware of your issues and stuff like this, is something that really arises in the late 1800s. And Van Gogh is a great example of that. This amazing intensity, surrounded by movement. So it's something, again, another level of conceptual modern art. And a lovely portrait or painting of a church. He felt that churches were actually pretty empty places. He was very religious as a young man, but he got disillusioned with the church because he was very fanatical about it, and he thought the church wasn't. He felt the church was very vacuous. The existing form of the church was very vacuous. He he didn't like it. And he said about this painting that this emptiness of the inside is kind of matching the emptiness of the heavens. It's a really beautiful painting, and it merges things, you know, it merges the sky and the inner space of the church, also with the grass, this blue reflections. So, and it's got this waviness, something out of a dream or something out of a vision or some kind of swimming inner feeling about something. But to go back to Impressionism in a more impressionistic sense, it is also giving you a sense of, you know, like heat waves on a hot day, and a kind of, you know, boiling church in France. And it really does bring that across too. So Gauguin, these are paintings by Gauguin. Paul Gauguin, he was a friend of Van Gogh until they had this famous falling out. Here's Gauguin here. They had this famous falling out, which is when they say that Van Gogh cut off his ear. And these days, Gauguin has come under a lot of fire because in the late 1880s, he went to Tahiti to try and rediscover an older way of life. He thought he had this, you know, quite idealistic idea that in these unsettled areas, Tahiti was a French colony, that they still had an older way of life, where the women and the men, but he liked to focus on the women, were sort of sexually open and free. It was kind of open love. There was an innocence, a kind of native religion, like here worshipping the statue, which didn't mean, you know, covering up your bodies and being pure and stuff like this. It was an open, free, early society of man, of humans. What he's come under fire for is the fact that he went there and women as young as 13 and 14, he had relationships with. Also paintings like this, when they were seen in Paris, of these scenes of this innocence and this, you know, early kind of lifestyle that he a bit idealized, they found it a bit ridiculous. They were like, you know, this dog is like a little cartoon character that a child can draw. And, you know, water, like a red stream with these odd kind of almost symbolist shapes, you know, when you start to get later painters who paint in a much more abstract way with these blotches of color. This is so different than, you know, 40 years before with Courbet and Manet, who were new in their own way, challenging the norms of society. But this was really, really, really new. These kind of blocky colors, these blocky figures, something much more about the spirit of what he's trying to bring across, as opposed to the actual scene itself. He also painted from his imagination, something that Van Gogh could never do. So this painting from imagination, also you can understand, gives a rise to something much more modern, because then you get things like surrealists and symbolists and all the kind of crazy stuff that's happened in the last 120 years of art. Also this one here, it's very modern in the sense that it starts to suggest surrealism and symbolism. Things aren't really accurately portrayed. There's no, you know, realism in the perspective of these figures. And there's something about, again, trying to get across the spirit of what he's feeling about this primal nature of man, naked women riding horses, and this, yes, perhaps you get the sense then of what he's trying to do. But the way he used colors was also quite an influence on other people, like Matisse here. This painting isn't in the Musée d'Orsay. I just thought I would include it for context. But you can see a bit of a similarity in the way that the colors are, they're not really fitting, you know, to have like orange splashes in the water. And then to have this woman whose forehead clearly wouldn't be bright green, but you get a different sense of color and insight from these kinds of modern painting. You also see the influence of Gauguin with Picasso in these faces and these kind of quite chunky figures, which you also see in things like Art Deco and that kind of movement. So one of the last sections is the latest, so I've tried to go chronologically, is Cezanne. So famously, Picasso said Cezanne is the master of us all, or the father of us all, sorry, and he's been called the father of modern art. It's quite interesting because this painting of apples and oranges, which I think sold for some crazy millions in the 80s or 90s, is interesting because it's not a normal still life. You might look at it and be like, hey, how is this like really modern? But there are a couple of things like how every object gets its own place, as if its perspective is exactly bang on how it should be seen in that moment. So, you know, this cloth hanging down, it shouldn't be this open fronted. It should be much more down to the side. The jug should be way behind the bowl. It should have shadows from the bowl. The thing's off. It's like, it's all a bit off, but it's bringing things out into the space so much more strongly. It's defying the eyes and this desire to have perfection in perspective and creating something much more 3D, something much more conceptual as well. It's bringing things out into a wider field of consciousness than they would otherwise have. This is Suzanne here. So you can see this in more modern art. So this is from Jean Metzinger from I think 1911. And look at this cup down here. This is from Cezanne's Apples and Oranges. It's really inspired by this new sense of perspective, where you have half the cup, you can see it there on the side, and half from the above. So he really influenced Cubism and this sense of abstracting images down to something very geometric and in a way more holistic. Like instead of just painting the front of someone, you can paint the front and the side and the depths as if you're actually portraying them in their entirety too, as opposed to just the image that your eyes can see. He did this also with his landscape painting. So this is also in the Musée d'Orsay. It's the Mont Saint-Victoire in the south of France. You can see as well that he's using almost like rectangular shapes for his color blotches. So this is abstracting Impressionism even further. And it's trying to create this dimensionality to these paintings, to try and bring out the things that he's seeing into a much more real way for the eyes. And this also really influenced, later people like Georges Braque to abstract it further towards Cubism. Cezanne spent a lot of his time outdoors painting, especially this mountain. And he came from a wealthy family, so he could actually spend the time and do that. This is one really important thing about, the arising of the modern, is the arising of the middle class, people having time to be able to paint, not needing to do it for commissions. So it's a really important feature. The last object is the polar bear by Francois Pompo from the 1920s. It's really beautiful and a great example of the arising of the modern in sculpture. Because what he would do is start with the model of a polar bear in its detail with, fur and, details of the face and the claws, and then abstract it, taking away the details further and further and further until you get to something like the essence of the subject. I love the clunky, this is Pompo, by the way. I love these clunky paws because they give this sense of the weight, this kind of padding heaviness of this beast with this slight sense of the claws here. Hardly any details in the face or the body, just this kind of lumbering yet elegant figure, which is something a polar bear is. It's lumbering and it's elegant, at least I think so. And this was something very new to really abstract the subject to this degree. It's really, really lovely. He really influenced a famous sculptor called Brancusi, and you can see his influence here. This is a falcon abstracted to this poise again of elegance and power. This is not in the Musée d'Orsay, but I thought I would include it anyway. So yes, that's an introduction to the museum, and I hope you enjoyed it and got a good feel of it, and a good feel of the history of modern art, if you like. So thank you very much for watching, and perhaps I'll see you on a tour in the future. Okay, bye.